Hi, I'm Dr. Wes Stafford, President of Compassion International, and I'm a victim of child abuse. That I would survive and live to lead a worldwide ministry is purely God's grace. My particular abuse spanned a number of years and happened several decades ago in a remote boarding school in West Africa. It was a horrific chapter in my life that I have forgiven, but I will never forget. What Satan meant for evil, thankfully, God has miraculously redeemed for good. That abuse has instilled deep in my soul an uncompromising call to protect children from the injustices that victimize and marginalize them. As I've interacted with Alliance leaders over the last several years, it's become very clear to me that they share an unyielding resolve to ensure the safety of children at all costs. Drawing from the vast experiences of child care professionals, cross-cultural workers, educational administrators, and abuse victims themselves, these leaders have prepared the materials that you're about to see to help ensure that the abuses I suffered will not be repeated. Please take this matter urgently to heart for the sake of the little ones, for those who cannot speak for themselves, for those that I call too small to ignore.
Hello, and welcome to our Child Protection Training Session. In this series, we're going to talk about how to protect the younger members of our worldwide Alliance IM family who are especially close to God's heart. In his book, Too Small to Ignore, Why the Least of These Matters Most, Dr. Wes Stafford, President and CEO of Compassion International, says, "We cannot claim that the Scriptures are unclear on how precious children are to God Almighty. The Bible tells more than a few stories in which God had such an important task to be done that he simply could not entrust it to an adult. Only a child would do." In Matthew 18:6, Jesus uttered a powerful and terrifying warning to protect little ones from the kind of stumbling and abuse that humanity can impose upon them if they were not treasured, nurtured, and respected enough. A spiritual battle rages over the children of our world. Research tells us that almost 2/3 of those who give their lives to Christ do so before age 18. Yet this group of people, so open to the gospel, is under attack. Millions of children across the globe are exploited and abused daily. Consider these sobering statistics. An estimated 300 million children worldwide are subjected to violence and exploitation, including the worst forms of child labor. In 2002, the United Nations reported 150 million girls and 73 million boys younger than 18 experienced some form of sexual abuse. Incidents of abuse peak between the ages of 8 and 12 years. However, 1/3 of all abuse cases involve children under the age of 5. It's estimated that 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 6 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse by the age of 18. And in a recent survey of 600 children from several mission agencies, 42 said they had been sexually abused on the mission field. And since abuse is often underreported, that number is likely much higher. Our Worldwide Alliance family must do everything within its power to protect the children in our care from every form of abuse. To do this well, we need to understand what child abuse is. Our organization's child safety policy states that child abuse is the treatment of a child under the age of 18, often in the context of a relationship of responsibility, trust, or power that endangers or impairs the health or welfare of the child. 4 types of child abuse are defined in the child safety policy. There's sexual, physical, emotional, and neglect. In this training, we will focus on child sexual abuse, which is the involvement of a child in sexual activity with an adult or an older child. This includes verbal and visual abuse or physical touching for the purpose of sexually stimulating another person. We will also cover signs of abuse, ways to prevent it, cross-cultural factors in childcare, how to respond to an abuse allegation, and our policy for reporting child abuse if you suspect it. As Wes mentioned earlier, our Alliance family is committed to creating a safe, positive, and nurturing environment for the children entrusted to our care and to ensure their well-being at all costs. Without intervention, child abuse can leave deep scars on victims that will follow them into adulthood. To grasp the dynamics of child abuse, it's important to learn about child molesters and their behaviors. This understanding will help caregivers reduce a child's vulnerability to abuse. Because perpetrators are from every nationality, social class, educational, and economic background, there is no clear way to identify them. We do know that 90% of abused children are harmed by someone they know and trust. This could be a family member, a friend, a church member, or on the field, another Alliance worker, or even a national. This is why it can often be so difficult for children to tell someone about their abuse. We also know that a perpetrator's choice of victims is typically based on preferred physical features, vulnerability, or simply availability. Abusers have a keen eye for determining which child may be more vulnerable, including those unsupervised and without an adult nearby. Children who are quiet by nature or who appear to be more defenseless may be targeted. One reason for this is that shy children may be less able to say no assertively. Perpetrators often spend large amounts of time around children, preferring them to parents or to other adults. Although this doesn't necessarily mean a person who does this is an abuser, this behavior should alert you to watch for inappropriate activity. Child abusers may try to engage children in activities that will prepare or groom them for future sexual activity. Developing intimacy and secrecy with the child is grooming behavior that intentionally seeks to lower the child's inhibitions. This may include frequent, private activities between the child and the abuser. Someone spending extra time alone with the child to become a special friend is a red flag. Another behavior to watch for is inappropriate touch. Many abusers first use appropriate touch to build a sense of security and trust with their victims, and then later move to improper touch. They frequently test the victim's physical, emotional, and behavioral boundaries, as well as the community norms. As trust builds, the perpetrator may continue innocent touch, such as sitting close or hugging the child for an extended period of time. Other grooming behaviors may include promising special favors or giving gifts and special attention to a child in private, hand-holding, kissing, or other physical contact, discussing problems with a child that would normally be reserved for adults, and then allowing the child to get away with inappropriate behavior or giving the child special privileges. The perpetrator may also threaten the child. For example, the abuser may say, "If you tell anyone, then your parents will have to go home." Perpetrators may also encourage children to keep what they're doing a secret. For instance, they may say, "Don't tell your mom that we're going out for ice cream and spending time together." Or, "If you tell someone what we did, they'll never believe you more than me, and you'll get in trouble." We need to teach our children to not keep secrets that could hurt themselves or someone else. They should be encouraged to tell their parents about such behavior. Many times, abusers are very skilled at gaining the trust of not only the child, but also the child's parents or guardians, because they will then be less likely to believe potential accusations. Let's review what we've discussed in this training. Abusers follow a pattern. First, they develop intimacy and secrecy with their potential victims. Next, they use appropriate touch, which gradually progresses to inappropriate touch. And finally, they maintain ongoing abuse through the use of privileges and threats. Our intention here is not to alarm you with this information or to discourage normal and healthy friendships between children and adults. We do, however, want to create in you a deeper level of awareness and appropriate accountability to ensure the safety of your children. While it's critical to recognize the behaviors of a potential abuser, it's equally important that anyone working with children knows some of the signs of molestation. We don't mean to shock you, but we must be realistic. In this segment, we'll explore behavioral and emotional indicators, physical signs, and verbal cues that you may see or hear if abuse is taking place. One of the most important signs to be aware of is a sudden shift in a child's behavior or emotions. Experts have identified a number of behavioral and emotional indicators of possible abuse that include the following: regressive behaviors such as bedwetting, thumb-sucking, or increased crying. Significant changes in the following behaviors may also be indicators: a loss or an increase of appetite, refusing to do something that was previously enjoyed, or refusing to spend time with someone previously liked, recurrent nightmares, disturbed sleep patterns, and fear of the dark, aggressive, disruptive, anxious, or self-abusive behaviors, withdrawal, running away, or failure in school, increased body self-consciousness, physical complaints with no explanation. Now, emotional changes to be aware of include increased fears of being alone, anger at the abuser or themselves or those who didn't protect them, sadness, guilt, shame, confusion. A child acting out sexual behavior or a detailed and age-inappropriate understanding of sexual behavior is a major red flag. This may include sexual self-consciousness expressed through a desire to over or underclothe. It may also be excessive sexual curiosity or seductive behavior. Younger children may engage in persistent, unusual, or aggressive sexual play with themselves, other children, toys, or even pets. Although physical evidence shows up in less than 5% of sexual abuse cases, we need to cover some of these indicators. Typically, child molesters are careful to not leave physical marks. If physical signs do occur, this is what you may see: irritated, reddened, or bruised mouth or genitals, discomfort when sitting or walking, or difficulty with urination, torn or bloody underclothing, or occasionally venereal disease. Again, any of these signs should prompt you to investigate the underlying problem and obtain more information, which we will cover later in this training. Do not attempt to examine a child alone. Leave the examination to a medical worker with a parent present. Again, the main thing to be aware of is a sudden shift in a child's behavior that involves one of the indicators we've covered. Children may also disclose abuse directly or indirectly through verbal cues. A child saying, "I don't like that worker," warrants the follow-up question, "Why don't you like her?" Also, comments like, "That person does things to me when we're alone," or "That worker fooled around with me," should raise immediate concerns. The best response for these types of statements is to ask open-ended questions such as, who, where, when, what happened next, so as to obtain more information. Now this is important. If you observe any of these signs of possible abuse, never ask leading questions that may put ideas into the child's head or confuse the situation. Let the child tell you in his or her own words. Remember, it's not your job to prove abuse. You only need to get basic information and report it so that help can be provided. Should you ever have the heartbreak of listening to a child describe an incident that may have been sexual abuse, we want you to know how to respond. First, the Alliance requires that you take immediate steps to report any allegation or suspicion of abuse, confirmed or unconfirmed. Suspicions must be reported to your team leader, your field director, the regional director, the assistant vice president, or the vice president for IM. Be sure to read over the child safety policy handout you will receive with this training, which outlines proper reporting procedures. Remember, reporting a suspicion of abuse is mandatory, but you must respect confidentiality. Only those who need to be involved should be told. Again, you must respect confidentiality. If a child comes to you with an allegation, be sure to offer a caring response. Try to stay in an environment that isn't isolated. Assure the child that she is not in trouble, listen to her, and keep your feelings under control. Avoid expressing disbelief or placing blame or minimizing the complaint. Use the child's vocabulary, and above all, avoid a response of denial. Communicate the following in your response to the abuse allegation. Affirmation. Let the child know that their concern is being taken seriously. Say something like, "I hear you, and I'm so glad you told me. I'm going to get you help." These reassuring statements are very important for a child to hear. Then there are procedures. The child needs to know what the next steps will be to ensure that help is provided. There's also assurance. The child needs to hear that the Alliance is committed to extend care and support in whatever way possible to the child and the child's family. Again, it's crucial to avoid a response of denial. Saying something like, "I can't believe this, you're making this up, aren't you?" is not what a child needs to hear. A good response would be, "Thank you for telling me. I know how hard this must be for you." It's important to avoid statements that minimize the nature of the abuse. An appropriate response is to say, "I'm very sorry about what happened. I want to help you in every way we can." Do not say, "Doesn't sound like much happened." Also, avoid comments that shift blame onto the victim. It's not appropriate to say, "Why didn't you tell someone earlier?" You should say, "You've taken a courageous step today. You've done the right thing." It's very important for a child to hear this from you. Remember, it's often an enormous step for a molested child to tell someone about their abuse. Because of the abuser's manipulation, a child usually feels responsible for what has happened. Now, these may seem like common sense reactions, but shock may cause you to react in a way that is not in the child's best interest, especially if you know and trust the person accused. When you talk with the child, don't press for details beyond what the child is willing to share with you. Again, it's not your job to prove the abuse. You only need to get the basic information and report it. The Alliance has people and procedures in place to do a full investigation. After the child has disclosed information to you, you need to let him or her know what will happen next. Say something like, "I won't tell anyone who doesn't need to know, but we do need to talk with someone who can help." This is important because sometimes a child may ask you to keep this information secret, and you cannot do this. Always disclose information carefully, keeping in mind the child's right to privacy. Report the allegation only to the people who can truly help. Suspicions of abuse must be reported immediately to your team leader or your field director, to the regional director or the assistant vice president, or even the vice president for international ministries. In this segment, we will cover critical components that the Alliance has put into place to protect children from abuse. These include careful screening and selection of workers that involve required background checks, in-service child protection training like this video series you're watching, and sound policy and procedures that include investigating all reports of suspected abuse. Our Code of Conduct for Child Safety, part of our Child Safety Policy, offers helpful guidelines for setting appropriate boundaries with children. You will be asked to sign it today at the end of this session. Let's discuss two powerful child abuse prevention tools that can help you set healthy boundaries that, one, minimize the isolation of children, and two, correct the imbalance of power that exists between adults and children. Since the risk for abuse increases with isolation, we follow the 2-to-1 rule. This means that when people work with children, two unrelated adults must work with them at all times. At least one of the two adults must be a female. Now, there may be times when this rule is impossible to follow. And when this is the case, reduce isolation by having a minimum of 2 children present during an activity. Inform the children's parents of your meeting and conduct activities at a time and location where interaction with the children is visible. For example, choose daytime over nighttime activities. Conduct activities in a room with windows and keep the door open. Additional ideas for how to reduce isolation are in the Code of Conduct for Child Safety. A second effective abuse prevention tool is to correct the imbalance of power between a child and an adult. Because of an adult's size, strength, and authority, there is a natural imbalance of power and control between an adult and a child. For example, bathrooms are typically isolated settings where an adult could take advantage of this imbalance. We recommend taking 2 or more children to the bathroom rather than one at a time. If you need to accompany one child who is not your own to the bathroom, first notify another adult caregiver. Another frequently overlooked situation with an imbalance of power involves older children taking advantage of younger ones. Sadly, between 25 and 40% of abuse cases involve an older child abusing a younger one. Some cases of older child abusers involve teenagers experimenting sexually. Others involve children who tragically have been abused and are repeating this behavior. Whatever the reason, the frequency of such abuse calls for proactive steps. The best approach in this area is to ensure adult supervision of activities between older and younger children, and to ensure that such interaction occurs in public or other non-isolated settings. Minimizing isolation and correcting imbalances of power and control will assist you as trained adults to reduce the risk of child abuse. We also encourage you to continually evaluate how you ensure child safety and think of ways you and your coworkers can further minimize risks. Another effective means to prevent child abuse is to maximize caregiver accountability. This is also covered in the Code of Conduct for Child Safety. In this last segment, we'll address caregiver accountability through implementing high standards of appropriate interaction with children. We will also discuss ways to manage cultural differences in childcare. Children need age-appropriate touch. For instance, you need to pick up a baby and hold him. However, this is not always the case for a child who is mobile. The following is not an exhaustive list, but it will give you a clear understanding of what appropriate touch is. Let a child lead you in showing what touch is acceptable. An example here is when a child reaches out to hold your hand. Be sensitive, pay attention to the child's cues. Ask permission before touching a child. Any resistance from the child should be respected. Touch non-vulnerable body parts, such as shoulders, backs, arms, and hands. Most all children love a high five or a pat on the back. Now, those are appropriate actions, but avoid excessive touch. Examples of inappropriate touch and interaction with children include tickling or wrestling. Now, we're not talking about being playful with your own child, but these activities with another person's child could be inappropriate. You should not sit a child who is 4 years or older on your lap. Have the child come and stand beside you. Kissing a child in a sexual way or in a culturally unacceptable way is not appropriate. One person taking children on isolated outings is inappropriate. Using sexualized language, telling dirty jokes, or showing pornographic pictures is completely inappropriate. Anyone who has worked overseas knows that childcare practices and norms vary greatly in different cultural settings. What may be considered acceptable in one culture might be considered abusive in another. On the field, childcare takes place in many different settings, from the national church and home meetings to sleepovers and leaving children with caregivers when parents are away. In some cultures, it's not unusual to rub the private parts of a young child to calm the child. In other places, helpers might employ physical force or language that some would consider abusive. Caregivers in different cultures must understand exactly what you expect them to do and not do when caring for your children. You will need to be proactive to understand in advance what approaches a caregiver might take to calm a crying child. Communicate clearly what practices you do not want used. Consult with experienced field personnel for caregiver recommendations. It would be wise to observe potential caregivers in a variety of childcare situations in order to discern their ability to supervise children. Remember, if you need to intervene with a child care worker in a cultural norm situation, do so with sensitivity in consultation with experienced workers. In this training, we've provided an overview of child abuse, discussed possible signs of mistreatment, how to address allegations, and who to report to. We've also talked about managing cultural differences in child care, as well as our child safety code of conduct to ensure children's protection. Our prayer is that this training will help you to understand the sacred responsibility every adult within the Alliance has to protect, care for, and nurture the children God has graciously entrusted to our care. Thank you.